Mike.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Mike's on Mike. This is now our fourth episode. Can't believe we've gotten that far, but so far so good, and we've gotten some great feedback from you, and thank you very much for that feedback. Last week, towards the end of the podcast, we talked about the healthcare scandal at the jail. After our show, Sheriff fired Armor Healthcare Services. That was the company that since 1917, I believe, 2017, not 19. Okay, good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's been a wonderful day.
It was the original jail.
Armor was the private company that had the contract for healthcare services with the inmates, and instead they hired another firm called Nafcare on another no-bid contract. The Tributary has been writing about this, in fact, broke this story, and because of that story, the sheriff had to take action along with the mayor who got involved in the conversation about it. And the gentleman who's the co-founder of that organization, the Tributary, is Andrew Pantazi, who's joining us here today in studio as our first official guest on Mike's on Mike, Andrew. So
well,
welcome
I'm honored.
to the club.
I'm honored. Thanks for having me.
We'll see if you say that in 30 minutes.
We'll see.
So tell us a little about you. You're obviously a journalist, which means that you didn't want to make much of a living when you first started in the business, but tell us more about where you've been and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm a Jacksonville native. Grew up in the sort of a North Mandarin area that used to all be farmland, and slowly over my lifetime has become subdivision after subdivision. And I still live in the area off of Powers now. I have 2 boys, and my wife is also a Jacksonville native. And I went back to Jacksonville to work at the Florida Times Union a little over 10 and a half years ago, and I spent about 8 years at the Times Union covering a lot of different things. I was a general assignment reporter. And then at the end of 2020, after the pandemic, and when we'd seen just no investment in the paper, when I had started, we'd had over 100 people in the newsroom. When I left, there were 22 people remaining.
Just amazing.
And it was incredible to see just how much we couldn't cover anymore. And so I left to start the Tributary, the idea being let's focus on one story, one topic at a time. How can we do in-depth reporting that hopefully leads to impact? And our the first endeavor, the goal was to cover redistricting, local redistricting. I believed that it was unconstitutionally and illegally being done, and we were able to expose the racial gerrymandering, which led to a federal lawsuit and the court throwing out those district lines. We also wrote about Sheriff Mike Williams leaving the county to move to Nassau County, which led to his resignation. And then now it's been Armor, which is a story I've wanted to tell since I was at the paper, and I started requesting a lot of these records back in 2020 about the contract and about the privatization of healthcare. But it's led to our reporting, which found, my coworkers' reporting found the jail deaths tripled from the time when we had in-house healthcare to when we privatized to Armor Correctional. And that kind of also tracks a time of between Rutherford, former Sheriff Rutherford, to Sheriff Mike Williams and Sheriff T.K. Waters.
Just clarify, go back on how the number of deaths, say that again.
They've tripled. So it used to be we had about 4 deaths per year in the years leading up to signing the contract with Armor. And during that time, we used to have FDOH offered healthcare services, and then Sheriff Rutherford actually brought it all in-house. So it was just JSO employees doing healthcare. And then in 2017, then Sheriff Mike Williams signed a contract in October to privatize and hire Armor Correctional to come in. And since then, we've averaged about 13 deaths per year, so more than triple the number of deaths. And a lot of those deaths are medical related. You get a lot of people who have like a diabetic ketoacidosis, which is when your blood sugar gets too high, and your blood sugar should be monitored. You should be getting insulin regularly. You should be able to regulate that easily. It's a very easily accessible medication, yet we see lots of diabetic ketoacidosis. We see lots of withdrawals as well, especially alcohol withdrawals that lead to deaths or overdoses in the jail, things that medical care teams should be able to prevent that have not been prevented ever since 2017.
Mike Tolbert?
What?
You want to jump on here? Well, the thing that's kind of interesting, and we kind of talked about this earlier, so my apologies, but you and Tolbert actually have an awful lot in common, except that he's 3 times as old as you are. But aside
Closer
from
to
that,
4, really closer to 4 times as old as you are.
But like you, he went from traditional media into more of something that first of all had tremendous impact as the tributary starting to have, but Inside Source was
Right.
a Bible around here. So
Yeah, I like you. I worked at the Times Union too
Yeah.
when I first came to Jacksonville, and but in 1995, if you guys remember, I needed a job, so I created a fax newsletter. I brought them today. They're headed to the Historical Society tomorrow afternoon.
wow.
And I had artistic success, but not financial success. And my advice to you would be, worry about the financial first, and the artistic will probably take care of itself. You can hire artists once you get some money.
Yeah.
But I did it all by myself, Andrew. And you've got a team I saw on the website, which is tremendous.
Right.
I sold subscriptions for $300 a year, once a week. Each issue was about 6,000 words, and you didn't have time to breathe because, as you know, you get one done, you got to start all over again. And I didn't focus on one thing.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of great sources. But tell me about starting the Tributary. Tell me, how did that come about? I mean, mine was just a hope and a prayer. I didn't have a business plan much at all. How about you?
I had spent a few years talking with different people about the future of the paper. I had been the union chair for the newsroom union at the paper, and I had talked to people about, is there any possibility of trying to buy the paper, for example? When Gatehouse first bought it, which then became Gannett, and we were going through severe cuts, we saw 20% of the newsroom cut right after Gatehouse purchased the paper. We went years and years, no pay raises, and people leaving because of that. And so I'd been talking to different people, and it kind of started with, trying to put together what the cost would be based on the earnings for the paper to purchase it, and realizing that money, if it just went into a nonprofit newsroom, would be so much more valuable. That really all you're buying is the title of the paper, and even the archives have already been donated for the paper. And so you're really just buying the title, and at that point, if you can raise money to buy it, why not try to start something new? And also, the paper, even in its heyday, still had problems. And so starting something new means you don't have to buy all the baggage or all the old ways of doing things. And I spent a lot of time talking to people who'd done this and looking at different models, for-profit versus nonprofit. And I believe that nonprofit is the best model that's out there.
So are there more nonprofits out there that we don't know about necessarily?
There's a lot of nonprofit newsrooms.
Including this show, by the way, which is nonprofit. People don't know.
Well, I should
And
say tax-exempt nonprofit.
And we're in the artistic part.
Yes.
We're not in the profitable part. We're in the artistic. No.
And we're still working on that part of it as well, by the way. We haven't quite reached that.
Well, I went to your website, which in itself is impressive. But if you go there, you can see who donates to this thing. I mean, it's amazing. You see the board of directors. I mean, you put together what should be a pretty solid structure. When I was doing this thing, I needed 500 subscribers at $300 a year. I could never get above 300, but it was a who's who. I mean, the only problem I had was that everybody else had a fax machine. So you sell one law firm, one issue, a big law firm, and then they make copies for all their lawyers, and then all their lawyers will make copies and send it to their best clients. Mm-hmm. So I was getting read. We were getting a lot of stuff out, but it wasn't that much coming in.
Yeah.
But you look like you built a wall up against that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to understand what happened with newspapers, the actual business model, which was, it used to be delivering the paper to you cost more than the subscription you were paying for it. It used to be really cheap subscriptions, and the money was entirely advertising, more than 100% of the net profit, because you're getting a net negative on the subscription. Almost all your money is advertising, and so that's your mix of national, big retail. That's your local grocers,
car dealers, classifieds,
obituaries. All the money was coming in through advertising. So then you have Craigslist, which took away the classifieds. You have Amazon's already causing the big box retail to shut down anyway, and you have Facebook and Google sucking up all the advertising revenue. So they had to shift. And so you saw this at the paper over time where 2008, there were 125,000 circulation. In the most recent year, they have to file with the Postal Service every year, their circulation. The most recent one was about 16,000. And
16.
They also report how much it costs for a 7-day-a-week subscription, and now it's about $1,200 a year.
Wow.
Because they had to get more and more of their money coming from the actual readers, so they're constantly increasing and hoping enough people stay on. And so that's where the money comes from today, and that's really changed. And I think it's really a market failure. There's many things the business side did wrong that would make it better if they hadn't done those things, but it's kind of the difference between you have a terminally ill patient, and we had a business that decided to put a pillow to the face of that terminally ill patient, and removing the pillow would be nice, but you still have a terminally ill patient. And so the idea with doing a nonprofit is let's look for alternative, more sustainable sources of revenue. So mostly that's philanthropy, that'll be foundations, that'll be everyday readers who are donating, and having that sense of mission. So we don't have to do restaurant openings. We don't have to do the things that might get a lot of clicks or might get more audience, because what we're trying to do is say, look at the impact of the work we're doing. What's the type of stories that are really expensive, that take time, that take expertise, and let's do those so that we can say, look at what your donation is able to fund with the work we do.
I don't think there's a question that your focus then on the healthcare issue in the jails, I think, broadened your audience tremendously, because this has become such a hot topic in my
that really where I thank you for the background. Unfortunately, I'm just thinking of how it changed in the whole thing. Anyway, the Tribune has written numerous stories about this jail health care. It is a scandal. You use the word scandal, but it is a scandal. How did you first engage in this story? I mean, obviously, we didn't read about it in the Times-Union, didn't see it on Channel 4. How'd you all find out about it? And thank you.
Yeah, so being in Jacksonville my whole life and being a reporter here for more than 10 years, I feel like I have decent sourcing at most government agencies, and including the sheriff's office. And I'd heard horror stories about what was happening at the jail. And I started getting rumors of different names of people, trying to get family to talk, trying to get records. And finally, we got one family that was very willing to cooperate, and that was Dexter Berry, this man who in November, he'd had a heart transplant after waiting for like 10 years for a heart transplant, finally got a heart transplant at Mayo Clinic. He moved to Jacksonville because of the heart transplant at Mayo Clinic. And he was having a dispute with a neighbor over Wi-Fi. They shared their Wi-Fi. The neighbor wasn't paying. And he said to his neighbor, if you don't pay, I'm going to beat your behind. And the neighbor calls the police. The police handcuff Dexter Berry, and he keeps begging them 7 times on body cam footage, saying, I need my medication. I've already missed the dose I have to take at noon or whatever time it was. I need to get my medication. I take it 2 times a day. It has to be at the precise time. And the officer's just like, yeah, don't worry. We'll get that all sorted. And they bring him to the jail, and he spent 2 days in jail, and during that time never got his medication. He got out of jail, and 2 days later he died. His body had an autoimmune response to that heart transplant. And so that was a pretty clear-cut example of he asked for medication. We got records that confirmed Armor knew he needed the medication. They confirmed what medication he needed. And Armor's response to us after our initial story was that it would take them at the soonest they could get medication like that is like 3 days. And it's like, so you're just admitting anybody who has a heart transplant who gets arrested is going to die at this point.
Yeah.
If you're saying, oh, it's not our fault, we just can't get medication like that. The guy was getting his medication every month from Walmart. I think you could have gotten the medication. I think that maybe you don't have enough systems in place to make sure you have reliable, specialized medication. But that's probably because you're cutting corners and trying to cut costs.
But it's not just that. He had the medication in his home.
Yes.
Why didn't they just go into the home, into his medicine cabinet, and say, this is the medication, take it with you?
Yeah.
So it's not only a breakdown in Armor, it's a breakdown in the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
I mean, there's accountability or lack thereof on both sides.
And even beyond all that, I think what makes his story particularly compelling is how ridiculous the arrest is in itself. Like, who has not gotten into an argument with a neighbor or somebody and said, if you don't pay me what I am owed, I'm going to beat you up, where you don't really mean you're going to actually beat them up. I mean, these are two older men who are handicapped. Like, they're venting at each other. And the body cam footage was so compelling because the officer gets there and the officer's like, I'm arresting you for assault. And he's like, no, I didn't hit him. I said, I'm going to beat your ass. Like, he just keeps being like, I don't think you understand. That's not, no, I didn't hit him. I didn't assault him. And the officer's like, yeah, no, that's assault. And he's like, no, I'm talking to my neighbor. I told him if he doesn't pay up, he did not understand how what he did was something that's arrestable. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. You hear two people are just arguing with one another. Why is the police coming and arresting just because somebody asked them to? And even to that degree, I mean, the idea that the police get called and they decide whoever called them, they're taking their side. They could have very easily taken the opposite side and said, wait, you're stealing from this guy? You're taking his internet you agreed to pay for and you're not doing it? But because of who called first. So I think that also raises the question where Sheriff Waters has been adamant. He will not, under any circumstances, do adult civil citations. I think to his credit, unlike the former sheriff, he's been much more willing to answer questions, even when they're unpopular. So he has been on the record. He's been clear. He's answered when iCare has asked him and a number of other groups have asked him. He has said he's not willing to do adult civil citations. He believes if you do a crime, you need to go to jail. But the flip side of that is...
if you could... I'm just sitting here thinking, if you can arrest somebody for saying, I'm going to beat your ass, I could have had 100 people put in jail. Because I hear that a lot.
I would have been put in jail 100 times.
Let me ask you, going back to the sheriff, you guys quoted him as, after he fired Armor, you quoted him as saying, it's what probably takes place in just about every healthcare system in a facility like this. Is that true? Is that the case? This happens all the time everywhere else?
I think that jail deaths is true, that there are jail deaths that happen everywhere, but it's not as bad as it is here. And I think it's especially, all you have to do is go back 10 years and see what the jail looked like under Sheriff Rutherford and see that it was in better condition than it is now. Not just facilities-wise. I think the facilities were not great, but the health care, at least, was much better, and we made a decision to privatize. So to say that, I think, ignores the very recent historical reality of, obviously Sheriff Rutherford was the corrections director before he became sheriff. Neither Sheriff Williams nor Sheriff Waters had extensive corrections experience beyond, Sheriff Waters had a year as a corrections officer when he was a rookie at the department. But Sheriff Rutherford had run the department and then gone in, and I think that gave him more expertise or more willingness to understand you got to spend money on your corrections. You can't just try to cut your costs on corrections.
Andrew, so Mr. Berry passed away. How did you get a hold of the story? How did the tributary enter into this picture, and when was that?
So there were a number of people out there who knew that I was looking for examples of jail conditions, and so someone had reached out to me and told me about Dexter Berry, and then that led me to connecting with who's now his family's attorney, Andrew Bonderud.
Well, I'm listening to this story, and I am thinking of the comment that we all have heard on many times, which is, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing. Andrew, when you think of what you and the tributary have done, it was too late for Mr. Berry, but what you have done, the extraordinary good work you have done, you have probably saved a lot of future Mr. Berrys. And I think, well, one, personally, but I think the people of Jacksonville should be very appreciative, and I personally say thank you. But I mean, for this to go on, and with all due respect to, we heard the sheriff saying, my responsibility is, to the citizens, but it's also to the inmates that I have incarcerated. I made this comment last time, was that, he says good, and I heard I heard his PR story, but I also made the comment last time that there needs to be a report card. I think part of his report card, whether it be annual or whatever it is, is how is the health care, and candidly, how is the mortality rate of the people that you're in charge of?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And it again goes back to, I think there's a consolidation issue at play here. Because we don't have a police chief, because we just have an elected sheriff, most elected sheriffs, your number one job is you're the jailer for the county, right? Like you go to, Hillsborough County, you've got Tampa Police, who are the primary policing department, and Hillsborough County sheriffs are primarily the jailer. And so you got people who focus on the jail. Here we have a sheriff who's elected who's really primarily focused on policing. Historically, our sheriffs are focused on patrol, law enforcement, or drug task force, or whatever aspect of policing, but it's usually the policing side of things, not the jailing side of things.
I'm sorry. He's got $500 million, and he
More
wants
than.
more.
Yeah.
He's got $500 million, and he wants more.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I want to know about Nafcare.
Yeah.
I read where the sheriff said that they thoroughly investigated Nafcare and had a recommendation from Hillsborough County. Did anybody else recommend them that you know about?
We've requested all the procurement documents and haven't gotten anything yet. And they did not post that they were bidding this out, even doing a sole source bid. Usually sole source bids are posted. They didn't even do that because they have their own special exemption. The sheriff's office does for healthcare bids, which seems very odd. One of the things we found out well, first let me answer about Nafcare before I go into all the peculiarities in procurement at the sheriff's office. But Nafcare has a bad reputation. We had heard rumors Nafcare was one of the 3 companies they were looking at, and Nafcare has had a number of tragic preventable deaths attributed to it. It's had, while it has not been convicted of a crime or charged with a crime, its employees have been in other places, nurses, medical professionals in other places for its behavior. So I think that looking at them and saying, oh, well, here's one sheriff who recommends them, I wouldn't be surprised if Hillsborough Sheriff does recommend them, but they do not have a sterling reputation in the industry as it is. And it makes me question also, what type of investigation did you do to try to find out if this is the best option available? Unlike other parts of the private jail system, so you got private telecoms, you got jail phone calls, jail tablets, how people are able to access, an internal email type of system. There's 2 companies that have almost the entire market share in the country for that type of service. Very much a monopoly. In healthcare, it's actually not like that. If you took the top 5 companies, I don't know that they even have a majority of the market share. And so there is a very competitive bidding process you could put out there where there's a lot of healthcare companies that you could assess. Even if you want to stay on the privatized model, you could be looking at these companies. And frankly, when it comes to liability for the city, when you inevitably are going to be sued, because if you believe, as Sheriff Waters believes, that these deaths are inevitable, that means you also believe these lawsuits are inevitable. He even said that. He said lawsuits are inevitable. How are you going to defend yourself when it's like we didn't look at anything other than the first one that was recommended to us? We were recommended this company. We went with them right away without asking any questions, without looking to see if there's a better option out there.
When I read about Nafcare, one of the thoughts that came to me was, why didn't we talk to UF Health?
Right.
Well,
we give them millions of dollars every year to take care of the indigent. And you mean that we can't associate with a hospital, a teaching hospital, no less, for them to be able to get the resources to be able to take on this particular job? Did anybody even think about it? Was it ever brought up? Was it ever discussed? Did UF Health just say, no, absolutely not, that's not part of our game plan? Why not use the resources you have in town rather than having to go out and doing a for-profit thing like we've done now in the last 2 cases?
As Donna said, when you look at what our priorities are, when you look at our hospital system, and when you look at the insurance industry that is also partnering with that, both for-profit and not-for-profit with that, the opportunities there, and, still being a little bit of a conservative, competition is good. Why didn't we go out there and have a little competition and have everyone see who could do the best deal for this?
I want to ask a question about Mayor Deegan. She has made health care a top priority. And shortly after, or right after she was elected and before she was sworn in, I was talking with her, meeting with her. And this was right after we found out about Mr. Berry. And she was really highly pissed off about it and upset about it. Her father died early from heart disease, so she knew full well that fellow being denied that medication, what was going to happen. Did she have anything to do with the firing of Armor, or do you know?
So Sheriff Waters says that he delayed firing Armor. This is his claim, whether you believe it or not. He says that they were waiting to fire Armor and execute a new contract until the new mayor was sworn in and ready, which he seems to forget that there was a mayor who was in office while he was in office before the current mayor, and it almost sounds like he's trying to blame the new mayor for the delay in firing Armor. But he made this claim during his news conference where he said, well, we were waiting on the mayor to get set up and established. We've been wanting to do this. He was claiming since like November when he took office. Again, I think there's some incredulous things about that that I have a hard time believing.
Why do you have a hard time believing that?
I think the timeline of when they were questioning things, they had problems with Armor. They certainly were going back and forth with Armor back in November about their many problems.
Did they ever talk about the problem of the conviction in Minnesota? The death of
no, I don't. No, they
in 2022.
They said they opened an investigation, an internal audit after we notified them when we requested comment.
But the point is that it is against the law to hire a company that's been convicted of a felony. Well, they did.
And I also think this is relevant for us locally. So, in Milwaukee, the DA there, John Chisholm, decided to charge the company. What often happens in these types of cases is they'll charge the nurse, they'll charge the doctor, but they don't charge the company. Charging the company and convicting the company was really important for John Chisholm to do. And I still have a question of where in the world is Melissa Nelson? Back in the day...
That's a familiar question.
Back in the day, if you sneezed wrong, Harry Shorstein had a grand jury ready for you. We haven't had a grand jury, I don't think, during any of Angela Corey's years or Melissa Nelson's years. I should say grand jury, the civil grand jury type that we had when we were investigating things like the courthouse cost overruns, or when we were investigating the sunshine issues at city council, or any of the dozens of grand juries we've had in the last few decades. And we haven't seen anything like that. We haven't seen any response that says, hey, jail deaths are tripling. Should there be any independent investigation outside of the sheriff's office?
I'm still struggling with the fact was that they had the situation at the jail, and what I'm saying, which I think I want to make sure I'm restating what you said, he said he wanted to wait until the new mayor was selected.
Yeah.
The new mayor has nothing to do with the contract with the health care. That's under his jurisdiction. That's what leadership's all about. I mean, I'm thinking... it makes no sense. That one blows me away. If he is in charge of the jail, the mayor is not. If there was a problem with the mayor, I would think the voters elected him to go in there and fix it. And did I miss anything?
And the sheriff has incredible power in our... I mean, number one, the state passed a law that says now sheriffs can move around their budget however they wish.
Without having any transparency.
Yeah, and sheriffs, if they have their budget does not increase or it gets cut, they can appeal to the governor to override a county, or in our case, our city's budget, arguing that they should have gotten an increase. That's happened out of Alachua County before. And... the sheriff's office does not abide by the ethics laws that the rest of the city has to abide by. So, in the city government, any employee anywhere gets a gift, they have to report that gift. JSO doesn't have to do that. And so when it comes to the lobbying effort...
kind of like the Supreme Court.
When it comes to lobbying efforts by these private healthcare companies, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what whining and dining is happening because they don't need to disclose it. The sheriff is the only one in that agency who has to disclose it. And only once in the last 10 years has sheriff, and that was Sheriff Mike Williams at the time, disclosed it for one quarter, one gift of about $100 value that he reported. So they're not, if they're getting gifts, they're not reporting it, and nobody else in that agency is even required to report it. So they're not even required to report their secondary employment if they were employed by a lobbying company or a private healthcare company.
Well, I've got one final question when you get into lobbying.
Do we know anyone at the table who has any experience who could speak to?
Check, please.
All throughout this,
All three of us.
all throughout this, I've read where Armor's lobbyist was Tony Baselli.
Yeah.
Have y'all ever been get him to speak to you?
We've tried and tried for since about February to get him to reach out. I will say that was the first time I heard about Armor. Was while I was at the paper, and I'd heard Armor and others had tried to get Sheriff Rutherford to privatize healthcare before that, and his administration had resisted efforts. And when Sheriff Williams came in, he named Mike Bruno as the corrections director, someone who did not have an extensive corrections background. And what I'd heard was that Tony Baselli was doing a full court press to try to get the sheriff's office to privatize as their lobbyist.
And amazing. Guys, the time is just running so quickly, but I got to ask you, what's next for the tributary? I mean, we've got moving the jail, we've got a stadium that's going on, we've got affordable housing, we've got some big ticket items that this city is going to be facing. What are you going to be focusing on?
Well, I still want to focus on the jail. I don't want to call canceling the contract as a win on its own because of the issues with Nafcare. I want to make sure that we're continuing to report on that. Right. We also recently hired our third staffer who's focused on the safety net. So that's going to be looking at everything from Medicaid to housing to what are all the various areas. Again, lots of private contracts. So how can we scrutinize and make sure are our dollars being spent wisely, and is there corruption in the grants that we give out?
Very good. Now, give us a commercial for the tributary, please, before we wrap things up.
Yeah, if you care about the issues that are going on in our community, then please consider contributing to the tributary. We rely on reader support. It's the only way we're able to sustain the three of us. So you can go to jaxtrib.org to donate, and we definitely need monthly, annual, and one-time donations to keep doing this work.
I have no problem trying to help you there. If, on the other hand, if there's ideas or thoughts that you would like for us to talk about, please pick up that phone
Absolutely.
And call us. I mean, we can partner on this one. I'm just wondering, with the lack of transparency about how the sheriff can do anything he wants without a transparent, how this is going to come in conflict with our new mayor, who talked about transparency, and which is, as someone at this table said, we've had 8 years under a cloud. To me, I unless something changes, I think part of our city is still going to be under a dark cloud. That's my observation.
I will say I think that's why we were chatting before recording about the general counsel search. That's why I think partly the general counsel appointment is going to be so important, because whoever Mayor Deegan picks for general counsel and the council approves will also be the general counsel for the sheriff's office and gives binding legal opinions. And so that includes on public records, and that includes on transparency, and the general counsel can ensure, at least to the degree that we have state law that requires that we are getting some transparency out of the sheriff's office.
Wasn't it the present general counsel that said may can also be shall, or some stupid thing that is different than what I learned in English?
Yeah.
But of course, I'm not a lawyer.
But he's also got his name in the hat again for being appointed this time.
He did. He applied.
Yeah,
that's right.
Probably because of how he knows how the English words can be used and moved around. Jeez.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Andrew Pantazi,
Andrew,
thank you so
very much. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Co-founder of the Tributary, please go to their website and help them out. We would appreciate that very much. Meanwhile,
and good luck to you. And thank you for what you're doing. Seriously,
thank you
for what you're doing.
Thank you, Mikes, very, very much. By the way, we have a new website that's up now that people can go and take a look at. It's mikesonmike.com. We're on Facebook. We're everywhere these days, which is just great. We're really trying to spread the word. So tell a friend, go onto our website or go onto our Facebook page, and please like us and send us your comments. We're going to try to take some of the comments, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, and read them on the following show, so that we can give you guys credit for whatever kind of poison you're trying to throw at the three of us. But we'll take it away.
Just make sure that the poison is directed at Mike generically, and not
let's
just
not get real
Not the
personal.
guests.
Yeah. Then we'll decide which Mike it is here on this side.
We'll see you all next week. Take
Thank
care.
you all. Appreciate it.